calendar.
Okay.
Blues came out moving for the only offense that's applicable is a war for talent and inevitable. Argument 1, some point is that it empirically denies that turn about global transnational markets. They can't check the violence of sovereignty, which are just trying to reclaim territorial, national territorialism. Second is that this is empirically denied, and this is empirically denied by our body evidence. We're not going for the criticism. It just protects us against this, their extension of their offensive claim that the state does not need to use territoriality to create a crackdown on illegal migrants. Our body evidence indicates that they play the legal and illegal categories against themselves, means there's no risk of unique link turn, and their inevitability arguments to be answered on the anxiety debate about the rational actor theory that they extend there at the top of the anxiety criticism. They say our fear is not all-consuming. Cross-sex is damning on this point. There's no actual scenario building in the 1AC. Their argument is just a generic internal link to the theories of competition, i.e. a discussion about how intersubjectively we calculate decisions that cause us to do violence. It makes all of our internal link arguments about the existential reliance of policymakers on their notion of the dissolution of the self. Direct internal link turns to all of their arguments about escalation, which means that you ought to make the debate contingent on the question of who better controls an explanation of how violence comes to manifest itself in the international realm. You say that it would be bad because we'd have unprotected sex and a lot of other things that sound pretty nice, but your Chang and Trademan evidence is the only actual substantive impact, or the only warrant to this evidence is that there is a fiscal burden upon the Asian countries that would let them in, which makes it politically unviable. Our also evidence indicates that we have to refuse the idea that we have to essentialize the political questions as merely a result of cost-benefit analysis, i.e. that it is too costly to bring these people in here. It's this type of displacement of responsibility on global economic logic that our Swasso evidence impact turns as being the fundamental cause of our ability to isolate populations as disposable. There's also no internal link to this nativism argument. I don't know where that is in any of the evidence that they cite in the 2AC on this point, but even if they would have risked of this argument, our Salter evidence proves that the methodology by which they solve nativism only makes it more likely, because the visa regime is a means of temporary inclusion that allows us to displace our anxiety about the movement of the foreign other. Their transnational arguments are internal link turned by the fact that the visa is a means by which we control and operate to see, which is the etymological root of the visa, the migrant body, so that we can be more certain that it does not pose a security threat, meaning that even if the alternative let everyone in, it would still be a politically more viable solution that is not linked to all of our offense. The permutation will be answered to one and R. They say that Swazo votes affirmative, but this evidence is just an indication that thought is also a political action. There's no explanation of how this interacts with the alternative. Just because the affirmative acts towards the future does not mean that they are the type of essential thinking their evidence makes. Our Swazo evidence is a clear contrast to that, and they say, and their arguments about why fear is good above are just the focus on fear of the death of the others, which ignores the whole point of our link argument. Our Park evidence indicates that fear trades off with anxiety. This is a thesis level claim not answered in the 2AC, means that we're winning the internal link as to how the affirmative's expression of fear that takes objects, people like China in the international regime, as fundamentally different from the anxiety that motivates those claims, which is a generic uncomfortability with existence. Their focus on death that happens to others is exactly our link argument. You never understand death as personal. This is Park and B6. Fear of death is the possible experience of something that makes biological levels subject to fear of ceasing to be our most awful anxiety. Things people exclusively objective from the fact of dying and be penetrated to protect us from the fear of ceasing to be our deep level anxiety. Distracting employees see death as a predicament. Then all such attempts to picture talk about death as fact or attempts to evade the deeper dimension of death by interpreting death only from the point of view as factors just from deep death outside of ourselves. We will see to uncover or repress ontological anxiety. The continuous search of being is the not arising from the inevitability of actual death. Rather, ontological anxiety is the deeper truth of our existence. Rather deeper than the external objective of empirical facts, biological death, even deeper than our personal fear of ceasing to be. Ontological anxiety is not derived from the fact of death, much more concerned about death derives from ontological anxiety, and the alternative solves all these nuclear war impacts. We advocate the use of judge space to imagine the impact claims of the affirmative on an existential level and allow that to penetrate the thinking and acting on the political level such that anxiety is taking on its own terms, not used to motivate the fear of particular threats. This imagination runs contrary to all of their scholarship which sees the impact as objects of political economy. Only the refusal of this orbital scholarship as manifestation of anxiety mutated by the affirmative into fear can solve the internal links that lead to nuclear violence. Swazo evidence above, and the alternative still solves even if we lose the framework debate. A is even if you were to ask policymakers endorsing fear makes nuclear war more likely. Hyman's 26. Fear has several effects on nuclear decision making. Fear has been shown to lead to lower cognitive complexity, further inflation threat assessments, and conflation of different types of threats. Only threats to status. We have the terms of life and limb. Demand for action leads to hasten decision making process. Heavy reliance on stereotypic failure to complete search for relevant information. Visa points that we can control the qualitatively best internal link to escalating cycles of violence, lead to war, nuclear use. It's all above for our mentality of genocide impact explanation, because the continual use of nuclear weapons on marginalized populations is the only empirical violence of nuclear weapons, the only quote wartime detonation of nuclear weapons. weapons was armed against Japanese cities full of civilians, and their scientific diplomacy arguments make scientific progress the telos of politics, enabling objectification and eradication of those who are deemed impediments to that progress. This is in 1988. A culture of science is incompatible with democratic governments as well as with rights and subject statements. Various arts to kill, maim, or exploit in the name of science. Science is the reading, dare, shock, and inflict violence in the name of national security, development for its own sake. Scientists, political leaders, intellectuals will impose poly finishers, fires, faster scientific growth. They are now scientifically minded Indian citizens who are willing to sacrifice billions of ordinary Indians to advance the cause of science. And we're winning the impact of once upon its macro level of violence, the repression of anxiety using fear to ontological essentialize are the objects of international relations. The largest proximal cause of macro level violence, free internal links. Case in point is that defeats the hegemonic epistemology of global militarism. Bergen to be said. Violent ontology dominates the foreign policy frameworks of modern states and militaristic power. Modern ontology of political existence security is a challenge was not by merely by a weapon, government, or policy, but by an overarching of thinking that lays claim to inspire trade the space of truth and existence. The most destructive features of modernity, militarism, repression, coercive diplomacy, intervention, economic exploitation, and environmental destruction derived from choices, not from choices by policymakers based on interest, but from capital and empirical discourse of scientific and political truth, reading powerful enlightenment, which is being confined within the subject universe. Policy makers' choices become the necessities, inevitabilities, and human suffering die, creates discursive and material portrays the direct mutually rewarding cascade of discourses that preordain militarism and violence to necessary policy response. These points to proliferate universal norms, causing torture, slavery, and genocide and war. Populations are mobilized to commit violence in mass by creation and projecting universal values to which some people do not meet. The affirmative represses the inside of anxiety that our universal projections are actually our facile attempt to capital out the force of our own mortality in constructing political involvement. That's the Swazo evidence. Their fear to capture death into a political program only bolsters the repressive violence. That's a root cause claim coming from the Swazo evidence. They say root cause claims are bad, but this is not monocausal. It's rather an explanation of how the multiple internal links ontologically create an incentive for warfare. CISA points that defeats the ontological security, which is more important driver of violence than physical security, skill, and etc. While physical security is important, states' ontological security is more important because as the feminist affirms the state's self-identity, not only physical existence, how states see itself on the cost of ignoring physical security threats are obviously the worst, but not on the cost of ignoring such ontological security. Shame can tell states to pursue action, sacrifice physical security, interests, but checking ontological security driven action because of attempts to change behavior in relation to experience shame is thus self-help behavior. Second is the destruction of consciousness. The impact of our relationship to death is not a byproduct of our part of existence, but itself the origin of existence. All of docility and cessation represses anxiety makes it impossible to use it to create a politically positive view of the world. That's our Davis evidence proceeds and outweighs the absolute impacts. They points to constraints on decision making, prioritization, and acting to preserve physical existence only possible with being as cognizant of relation to death, destruction of consciousness, short circuits, the possibility of that affirmation. Visa points back to life. That's consciousness includes the affirmation of life, because only when we're able to make life, including death, our own and construct our own meaning for existence, can we give life our own meaning. They say it's subjective, but that's exactly our argument. It's just impact claim for the affirmative. It outweighs the affirmative because of predicted scenarios. For extinction, all presume that life has value that's worth protecting. It's only true in a world where consciousness can raise subjectivity. They say Swazo would vote affirmative. This evidence is just contrasting world order scholarship and global governance. I've also answered that above, and the ontology comes first, the Swazo 52. The decision of domestic international affairs becomes anachronistic and remaining useful only for the purpose of the methodology, the science of politics, radically empirically oriented methodology, political science, in advance of various political things that constitute the objects of investigation, political science, so they can on derive from all political ontology, taking a step back and pausing abandoned research undertaken by political science ontologies with the demarcation of the subject matter that one begins to make a move from casual meditating and conservative meaning that reins in things into the ground to enable scientific inquiry, the orientation of such a thing primarily ontological and positive scientific. That's an internal link to all, or that's a reason to dismiss all of their economic logic arguments and their specific policy key arguments. Now, the Blight evidence. Blight says psychology focused on individuals. This is where rational actors are merely individuals engaging in roles. Blight's inability to articulate his data without recourse to individual well analysis proves the necessity of the alternative to Perez in 89. Blight argues that malignant spirals may well be produced by trust and mistrust between persons, but not between sovereign nations. First persons take on the various roles of government and acts. They act the role definition of rationality, define the definition of performance. It's not obliterate psychodynamic analysis. It's always in persons' roles and situations. The second thing that's wrong with Blight is his own practice after telling us governments and nations are not proud persons. He invites us to focus on the phenomenological study of leaders in crisis situations. It doesn't agree with his rejection of psychology when we look at the ways in which persons assess risk, experience fear, or imagine responses. We are in the realms of psychology. The reductive contribution of psychologists because policymakers think the problems are exclusively rational is therefore a poor reason for doing so. The assumptions to which the decision making is based, the interests upon which they are served, and the definition of events which lead to crisis will each have to be analyzed multifactorially, including psychological variables.
Your argument that the alternative is still able to solve because the judge can consider the impact, or like allow the impact to permeate sort of his valid. I guess I don't understand. So how does the alternative sort of still solve the AFF, given that you've read links both to the pragmatic outcome, which is the visa system, and links to our framing? How do you do any of the affirmative?
Well, I mean, we don't purport to claim do part of the affirmative claim, right, or solve your various internal links. It's just a question of which approach is better for nuclear violence. Our arg is just the alt is a better way to approach nuclear violence.
So essentially, you're just...
We solve your impact, not your internal.
Okay, so you have an impact, which is nebulous nuclear violence.
That's
which
your impact, yeah.
I don't know how that does not link to your critique, given that the first 30 seconds of your speech is about why ambiguous scenarios for nuclear violence are bad.
Fair question. We have a question of relationality, right? For the affirmative, that nuclear impact scenario is based on the question of what he does with his ballot as a policymaker, i.e. the choices that are made in a politically polemic context, right? As our swaths of evidence contrast essential versus non-essential understandings of fear and anxiety.
That's not what your link evidence is talking about. It just says that these sort of universal conceptions of
talk
nuclear
about
violence are bad.
Our park evidence draws a distinction between fear and anxiety and says that fear trades off with anxiety.
That's a totally separate question, but
I know it is.
So I guess let's
also implicated.
The ontology argument, the idea that somehow your ontology is distinct and you can say, or rather, the argument you make right after ontology comes first is like, then that means you should reject all the reasons why economic logic is good. I don't understand why that is the case.
Sure, that's probably
right?
a little
Our
bit
ontology is
reductionist
that
of what I
economic
want
logic
to
is
say.
good.
Our argument is that ontology grounds the possibility of those economic decisions, so to leave the ontology of violence in place and only challenge the economic logic, as the affirmative's critical advantage does, is to miss the actual justifications for the economic logic in the first place.
So
ontology, ontology controls economic theory.
But the logic is economic gain, so I don't understand why ontology is necessarily distinct from questions of economic logic.
That's precisely my argument, is that it is not distinct, but that ontology undergirds all of the reasons why those calculations get made in the first place.
You say that sort of the reason why our sort of nebulous scenarios for nuclear violence are bad is because it manifests this general discomfort with existence.
No, the opposite. Anxiety is general discomfort with existence. That's good. You take anxiety and make it fear and fear of things.
So I don't understand why the affirmative can't both isolate sort of one scenario for catastrophic risk, but also accept that, everyday risks are inevitable. Like I might trip and fall over going back to my seat. Why can't sort of there be this realization that there are risks, that there are catastrophic impacts as well?
Two answers to that. One is the park evidence is a trade-off this 2AC is not answered, that says fear trades off with that recognition that that anxiety is everywhere, and the second is Swazo draws an essential, non-essential extinction.
I thought about trying to
Okay, sorry, totally stole your chance.
It's at the bottom. It's at the bottom of the
Actually, this is not
It
mine.
was just a justification for why we have to do policy.
You sure?
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. You have 2 minutes.
Team and the one.
Sorry, was that not your time?
Yeah, that is not mine.
Oh.
It'll take like 2 seconds. Thanks.
We took 1 second to prep with Pepper in the last bit.
Okay.
No, we're good.
All right. It's gonna be first. I'm gonna go security, and do you have framework load on which sheet?
It's really all. Don't worry
I
about
put it
that.
on a separate thing, so I'm gonna answer framework after the security K, and then go to anxiety.
Security.
So security and then the stuff on anxiety.
Security, framework, anxiety.
I have framework.
Yeah, I do.
You can float however you want, but I'm going to after security.
Got it.